Hello, then, gents. We're on the module DD316 Modern Political Ideas, Chapter 14 Opposition and the End of Communism in Poland. In Poland, it was decided to rises again in the early 1988. This announcement provoked the greatest industrial unrest seen since the opposition of marital law. The opposition continued to resit coalition by the party leadership to share responsibility for the economic stabilisation plan, while they were still denied a legal status. But in any case, the strikes petered out in May. Gorbachev paid a visit to Poland in July and would have been able to clarify the nature of the new expectations of the Soviet Union. Soon after, in August, a major new wave of strikes broke out, and this time promoted a statement from Zelensky that he would now discuss legislation of solidarity. The nature of the expectation that underlaid this change in approach is unclear. In the light of subsequent developments, many assume that the momentum of the opposition underlying the new wave of strikes had become irresistible. But there are alternative interpretations of the steps that led to the end of communism. It is quite likely too that Gorbachev and Zelensky decided that, as Solidarity had not been able to capitalise on the strikes in May, it might well be possible to incorporate union within a reformed communist order in Sanford 2002. Whatever the expectation, was decided to open negotiations with Solidarity to revisit questions of trade union pluralism. General Kizachek, a key member of the Zelensky leadership, with a lengthy career in military intelligence and the security apparatus, was designated to lead the discussion with Solidarity and the opposition. Other changes in the top leadership were made in preparation for the talks, including the emergence as Prime Minister of Mieczysław Wakowski, who was identified with the reform wing of the party but had a stormy relationship with Solidarity as Deputy Prime Minister in 1981. There was initially considerable resistance to key figures like Kurin and Michnik participating as Solidarity advisors, but this was overcome following a change in the party leadership and opened the way up to the roundtable talks getting underway in February 1989. Agreement was reached in April on a range of issues, with Solidarity again being registered and given legal status. Commitments to significant electoral and institutional change were also made. Restoration of the Senate to be freely elected and reconstituted Parliament, 65% of whose seats were reserved for established regime parties, the Communist Party and its tame allies, and 35% being open to free competition. The results of the first round of elections, held on the 4th of June, showed Solidarity-sponsored candidates winning 160 out of 161 parliamentary seats, open to competition, and 92% of 100 Senate places. More surprisingly, 33 out of 35 places on the Parliament National List, notable figures forming part of the regime bloc, were not filled at all as candidates failed to reach the mandatory threshold for election. Many voters took the opportunity to cross out the names of unpopular candidates and register further opposition in this way, excluding figures like Kizak and Wakowski. From the new parliament, as in the case of the 1987 referendum, it appeared that the vote failed to meet expectations because the authorities misjudged public feelings, adopted and opted for inappropriate electoral procedures. Lewis, 1994. The party negotiators were remarkably ill prepared for the negotiation and ignored much expert advice about the choice of electoral mechanism. The result of the second round was clearer, with Solidarity candidates winning all 161 parliament seats open to competition in 99 of the 100 Senate seats. In the conclusion, the implications of the election results for government formation were far from clear, but the writing was on the wall from post-communism. Zelensky proposed General Kizek for the presidency, but this did not meet with public approval. He then resigned as party leader and took on the role of president himself just after participation in the Warsaw Pact summit where Gorbachev would have been unable to express his opinion on the move. Kisilchev was then significantly proposed as prime minister, but this idea did not meet with support either. Ideas of different combinations of the contending groups and political parties circulated. The 10 parties that had been in coalition with the ruling Communist Party were now showing greater independence in a search for someone to lead them. It was Michnik in the new Solidarity sponsored newspaper, Gazeta Wyborcza, who proposed a formula: your president, our prime minister, and this indeed was the path followed. Well-known independent Catholic intellectual and now editor of a Solidarity weekly, Tadeusz Małowski, was proposed as prime minister and confirmed in a new role by Parliament towards the end of August. In September, he announced a new government, which has thus become the first non-communist controlled governing body in Eastern Europe since the early post-war years. Poland was also the first country to abandon the leading role of the party, a development confirmed in January 1990 when the Communist Party dissolved itself and set up a new Social Democratic Party and smaller allied organisation. There was now no leading role in the regime, and not even a Communist Party to do the leading. Chapter 15: Personal Liberation, a long road from gay rights to same-sex marriage in UK and USA. The road to most liberations is actually a process of gradual social reform. The endpoint may appear to be reached quite quickly and build up of public opinion, political support, a change in law, celebration for the victory. But the run-up to the change was often been a long, hard struggle. We've seen this in lead up to the same-sex marriage in the UK and USA. It didn't just happen suddenly. It was preceded by many others changes in the law. Many positive, some regressive, with opinion on this affected by which side someone is on, of course. The establishment of campaign organisation focused on making or preventing the change, some assimilative, some radical, brave figureheads and spokespeople at a great volume of published opinion. This chapter explores the background of this modern social reform, looking back at wider history, gay rights reform from the late 19th century onwards, focusing on the mid-20th century to the modern day. In doing so, the chapter covers key people, events and laws in both countries, as well as the underlying political ideas, themes and issues. The chapter demonstrates that the decisions, challenge and position of ideas at a micro-personal level can liberate and repress people both individually and as a group and change the social reality of all those who come after. As such, gay rights reform is a key part of making sexual history. Events and changes are not isolated events. They inform how society understands homosexuality, how relationships are defined, how people are treated, and whether they are political citizens. In essence, whether people are liberated or not, and to what extent. The late 19th century identification and criminalisation. In the UK, the 1885 Criminal Law Amendment Act ushered in new restriction of homosexual activity, with all sexual activity between men criminalised. Before this point, only sodomy and intercourse was a sexual offence. Under the 1861 Offences Against the Person Act, in the 1880s, male homosexuality became a criminal and punishable public identity, rather than just the sexual act being so. Weeks 1981. The 1885 Act was not originally concerned with homosexuality, rather the suppression of brothels and protection of women, but a clause was inserted which read, any male person who in public or private commits or is a party to commission of or procures or attempts to procure the commission by any male person of any act of gross indecency with another male person shall be guilty of misdemeanour. House of Commons 1885. Homosexuality become a legal, medical and psychological category of person, with one of the consequences being increasing negative press coverage of homosexuality as well as increased persecutions. Homosexuality is, then, an idea itself. Of course, men always have had sex with men, but homosexuality as a concept, an idea, is a creation specific to historical context. in Falcourt 1978. He argues that far from discussion of sex and sexuality being repressed in the late 19th century, there was a discursive explosion at this time, of which the 1885 Act was part, focused on banishing forms of sexuality not amenable to strict economy or reproduction, unlike reproductive heterosexuality. Bodies and what people did with them was subject to surveillance and discipline. The homosexual was thus created and named. Becoming a sexual identity with the liberation of men attracted to their own sexual kirtle. Note that lesbianism was ignored in the 1885 Act and has never been directly legislated against in the UK. As Weeks 1981 notes, it was thought that laws against lesbianism was publicised it and therefore do more harm than good. House of Lords 1921. At the same time, there was an emergence of a whole homosexual identity, and in a sense, perhaps the beginning of the liberation movement. As Falcourt 1978 writes, homosexuals began to speak in his own behalf, to demand that its legitimacy or naturality be acknowledged, often in the same vocabulary, using the same categories by which it is medically disqualified, something he calls reverse discourse. In the USA, sodomy was considered a capital offence in many states in late 19th and early 20th century. Interestingly, punishing male and homosexual sodomy was not the main aim of these laws. Rather, they arose from the perceived need to protect public moral and decency, as well as children, women and weaker men from sexual assault. Consensual private homosexual activity became a focus of the law only in the 20th century. When homosexuals become a target of oppression during the McCarthy era, with large numbers of men arrested for consensual sex, lumped together with child molestation as a basis for widespread enforcement of sodomy laws against gay and bisexual men. Cato Institute. There are two important things to note here. First, as in the UK, in the US, lesbianism was ignored. Second, the concept of gay rights reform in the UK and the US is different. In the UK, it is the House of Parliament that have legislated change, although same-sex marriage is devolved issue in Scotland and Northern Ireland, meaning change has, for most part, applied to the whole of the country at the same time. The picture in the USA is more complex, with individual states being responsible for state-wide legislation, leading to different laws of different states, accompanied by federal-level actions and Supreme Court action. Number 3, the mid-20th century permissiveness and liberation. In the UK from 1885 Act onwards, persecution of gay men were common. There was a contradiction though. While gay sexual activity was an offence, declaring oneself to be gay was not, as Smith 2012 writes. This once again demonstrates that it was ultimately the sexual act that was deemed offensive. The 1885 Act remained in place until 1967 Sexual Offences Act and the decriminalisation of private sexual activity between men over the age of 21. This was preceded by the 1957 report by the Wolfenden Committee, established in 1951 with the aim of considering laws covering prostitution and homosexuality. David Maxwell Fyfe, Conservative Home Secretary, was commissioned the Wolfenden Report. British Library 2018 had promised to rid England of this plague. Homosexuality early in the 1950s, Milmo 2013. It's ironic then that the report ushered in gay law reform, as well as the fact that he was the one to commission it in the first place. Wolfenden report was a response to moral concerns of the 1940s and 1950s, as well as worry about the increased prosecutions. Indeed, the number of recorded offences of indecency with males in the 1950s was remarkably high compared to previous years. Records show that in 1952 there were 1,687 record offences known to police, whereas for the whole of 1935 to 39 there were only 299. Geoffrey Powelton 1991, while the Wolfenden report was a significant step forward, it did not recommend new laws, merely non-persecution in certain circumstances. Indeed, the gay rights campaigner Peter Tatchell notes that Home Office transcripts show Wolfenden himself chair of the committee. It argued against more progressive recommendations. Maxwell Fyfe, by 1957 no longer Home Secretary, was vehemently against the report's recommendations. Weeks 2000 notes that the Wolfenden report treated homosexuality as a condition. Mackintosh, 1968, wrote that treating homosexuality in this way is a control mechanism, that it provides a threshold between acceptable and unacceptable behaviour and segregates and contains deviant from non-deviants. Mackintosh proposed an alternative approach, wherein the homosexual is a social role rather than a condition. Both Mackintosh and Falcourt then see homosexuality as a construction. Despite the Wolfenden limitations, it served as a blueprint for the permissiveness of 1960s. Weeks 1981 included new legislation on abortion and marriage. Weeks 2000, page 147, sums up this time as a collapse for the whole pattern of regulated sexuality, enshrined in the assumption that the law that had right and duty to say what was right and wrong in both public and private life. While 1967 change in UK law was progressive, it was modest. No new rights were created. It was more about better protecting public decency by leaving private morality alone. In this sense, the reform was not a philosophy of liberation, but rather in the tradition of English liberalism, modest and pragmatic. Weeks 2000. For many people, though even limited reform was problematic, a symbol of moral standards being abandoned to be replaced by moral relativism. Interestingly, there was evidence that after the 1967 Act, there was actually a rise in recorded offences of gross indecency, with acts